begin our programming now. I'm very happy to have you all here be with us. My name is Dan Jocelyn Smitowski. I'm the Director of the Center for Christian Jewish Learning and Kraft Family Professor here at Boston College. I'm pleased to welcome you to our event this evening that is also co-sponsored by the Jewish Studies Program at Boston College, overseen by Professor Matt Sinkowitz. And I'm so glad to have you all be present here for our lecture tonight by Daniel Ross Goodman. So please let me introduce our speaker. Rabbi Dr. Daniel Ross Goodman is a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Divinity School and a faculty member of the Theology and Religious Studies Department at St. John's University. He holds a PhD from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. A scholar of modern Jewish theology, he's the author of 3 books, I think actually even more now, including Soloveitchik's Children, Irving Greenberg, David Hartman, Jonathan Sacks, and the Future of Jewish Theology in America. And it's on the topic of that book that he'll be speaking tonight. I also just want to add that Dr. Goodman's work on Joseph Soloveitchik and his heirs is of particular relevance to the work of the Center for Christian Jewish Learning. Rabbi Soloveitchik was an important figure in the history of Jewish life here in Boston prior to his departure to New York and Yeshiva University, and his influence is still widely felt. Likewise, the work of the center has intersected with Soloveitchik's own and that of his intellectual heirs over the years. And we have offered programming and other ways of commemorating Soloveitchik's influence here that you can find on the center's websites. And so we're grateful to have Dr. Goodman with us to present on Soloveitchik's Children, Confront Christianity. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you, Matt and Ruth and Camille and everyone here at Boston College who's made this event possible. It's really great to be here. Great to be back in my home state of Massachusetts, as always. And thank you all very much for coming. So as Dan said, the topic of my talk tonight is about Soloveitchik's children, about how his disciples confronted Christianity. And it's also about what we can learn from them and how some of their approaches can perhaps help us today in our contemporary efforts in increasing interreligious understanding and cooperation among peoples of all faiths. What I'd like to discuss with you tonight is first to give you a general picture of how Rabbi Soloveitchik and his disciples confronted Christianity and what their approaches to interfaith dialogue were. And then, time permitting, to sketch out what I believe are some of the possibilities and in my belief, imperatives for interreligious dialogue and interfaith relations going forward in our era, in our generation, and the next. As many of you know, Jewish-Christian relations is, it's not a very, at least in the modern era of having, thank God, good relations between Christians and Jews, it's not a very long history. I'm a movie person, as some of you may know, and some of you in the audience may, and in film, people talk about it's such a new art as opposed to literature. People have been writing for thousands of years, or painting. People have been painting even longer than that. But film is such a new art, and same way, in many ways, you can say that about the era that we're in Jewish-Christian relations. It's if the art of film is only a century plus old, maybe 120 years, 140 years. Jewish-Christian relations, as we know it today, is maybe about half of that in its history. And Orthodox Jewish-Christian relations is even shorter than that. It really started maybe 40, 50 years ago, thanks to some of Rabbi Soloveitchik's disciples. So I won't get into the whole topic now of how this modern era of Jewish-Christian relations began, but I do discuss some of this in the book, chapter 3 of Soloveitchik's Children. But I'll begin talking about how Orthodox Judaism responded to what was happening in the developments in the early era of Jewish-Christian relations, and then how Rabbi Soloveitchik and his disciples reacted to those developments. So this part of the story really begins in the early 1960s after Nostra Aetate, after the Second Vatican Council in 1964, when Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel went to visit the Pope at the time, Pope John the 23rd. And that was a pretty big deal in the Jewish world at that time, and for multiple reasons, as you can imagine, and it provoked from some very strong reactions, including responses from the Orthodox identifying Young Israel movement, which argued that Heschel's meeting with the Pope was, in their words, a flagrant violation of the decisions reached by unanimity of all organizations, and that it was degrading to Jews to witness the specter of its spiritual leaders who lower themselves to beg before the faith leader of another tradition. So you could see how strong the feeling was among Orthodox Judaism at the time against having any sort of Christian-Jewish dialogue, which is perhaps shocking for us today to read this and hear this for those of us, at least in maybe the more modern or centrist wings of Orthodoxy, who kind of take Jewish-Christian dialogue for granted. But that's how things stood in that era. And Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, following this Young Israel, following this denunciation of Young Israel, of Rabbi Heschel's meeting, Rabbi Soloveitchik delivered a very important address on the topic of Jewish-Christian relations that some of you may be familiar with. That address was later published under the title Confrontation. And in that essay, Rabbi Soloveitchik argued that interfaith dialogue was something that Jews could engage in publicly as long as it did not veer into the realm of theology, only if it stayed in the area of public policy. Soloveitchik warned that, in his words, it is futile to try to find common denominators between Judaism and Christianity because each faith community expresses its faith in a unique way, in a singular normative gesture. Rabbi Soloveitchik also argued that Judaism and Christianity have incommensurate differences when it comes to their standardization of practices and other dogmas. And he gave other reasons for why, in his belief, Judaism and Christianity should only face each other in the full knowledge of their distinctness and individuality. And he went on to maintain that even though our two faiths share many historical and cultural affinities, when it comes to the realm of faith, in his words, the whole idea of a tradition of faiths and the continuum of revealed doctrines, which are by their very nature incommensurate and related to different frames of reference, is utterly absurd. So again, here we have an example of an Orthodox thinker, and not just a thinker, but a standard setter thinker for the movement, setting a really harsh barrier to any kind of Christian-Jewish dialogue, at least on the theological level. And because of Rabbi Soloveitchik's stature in the Orthodox world, that guaranteed that position became normative for Orthodoxy, at least for modern Orthodoxy. In 1967, the rabbi of the Young Israel Synagogue of Brookline, which I understand is well represented here tonight. Their tune may have changed since then, but at that time, the rabbi of the shul declined to participate in a Jewish Christian gathering for the very reasons that Rabbi Soloveitchik outlined. So that's where things were by the late 60s in Jewish Orthodox and Christian dialogue. But things began to change a little thereafter, thanks to Soloveitchik's children and some of his disciples who began to dissent and argue with his position. One of those was Rabbi Emanuel Hartman, who's sometimes considered a contemporary of Rabbi Soloveitchik, sometimes considered a student. Rabbi Hartman differed from Rabbi Soloveitchik in several important respects. The new generation of Orthodox theologians, Rabbi Hartman observed, were different from Rabbi Soloveitchik's generation, the first generation of American Orthodox theologians, if you will. This second generation of Orthodox Jewish theologians, according to Rabbi Hartman, were starting to embrace dialogue with non-Jewish thinkers and non-Jewish faiths, not just Christians, but Buddhists and members of other faiths. And they began to argue that what Rabbi Soloveitchik set up in terms of this very harsh barrier between Jewish-Christian engagement on a theological level is something that really we should start to reassess for various reasons. And that second generation of American Orthodox theologians included thinkers like David Hartman, Michael Wischergrad, and Irving Greenberg, my own teacher and mentor in Jewish theology, Rabbi Dr. Irving Greenberg. And all of them generally had no qualms about Jewish-Christian dialogue for various reasons. And they even tried to, at least in the case of my Rebbe, Rabbi Greenberg, they even tried to persuade their Rebbe, Rabbi Soloveitchik, to say that maybe you should reconsider your own position on Jewish-Christian theological dialogue. So this really began with my teacher, Rabbi Irving Greenberg, when he accepted an invitation to participate in a Jewish-Christian conference here in Boston, fittingly enough. Rabbi Greenberg, as many of you know, and as I discuss in the book, was a very committed disciple of Rabbi Soloveitchik's, but not always a faithful one in terms of keeping to the letter of his positions, but he did consider himself as a student who kept in the spirit of Rabbi Soloveitchik's positions. Rabbi Greenberg felt that not only was Jewish-Christian dialogue that delved into the realm of theology permissible, but he believed that it was highly beneficial. He believed that interreligious theological dialogue contained within it the potential to ameliorate hatred, increase cooperation, and lessen the possibility of future religious violence. If Christians after the Holocaust were doing teshuvah, were repenting by seeking to repair their relationships with Jews, then should not Judaism also acknowledge that that there is a new opening now for a new relationship between Judaism and Christianity and at least meet Christianity halfway. Rabbi Greenberg went on to make Jewish-Christian dialogue a core component of his rabbinic mission and theological work. And he later reaffirmed that more recently in a 2015 statement to do the will of our Father in heaven toward a partnership between Jews and Christians that went on to be signed by about 30 other Orthodox rabbis. According to some of the other prominent modern Orthodox signatories of that document, which included Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, Rabbi Eugene Korn, who I understand may be listening today with us, and I want to acknowledge Rabbi Korn's work on Jewish-Christian relations and in this field. According to these signatories, Rabbi Soloveitchik's ban on interfaith dialogue was no longer applicable. And Rabbi Korn wrote that Jews have real enemies today, but Christians are no longer among them. Rabbi Korn, moreover, stressed that interfaith dialogue did not violate Orthodox understandings of Jewish law, and this is something that Rabbi Greenberg believed as well. Another scholar who's written substantially about this topic, David Novak, has observed that there are no specific halachic impediments to serious talk with Jews. In other words, the letter of Jewish law does not prohibit Jewish-Christian dialogue. So even if one argues that the consensus today in the modern Orthodox community is that interfaith dialogue is permissible, but going back in history a bit, and as we saw how this was not the case in the 1960s, the question was, how was a student of Rabbi Soloveitchik, such as Rabbi Greenberg, able to break with him on this issue in the dramatic way that he did, in this public and decisive way as well? I have an article where I sketch in further detail, where I really delve into this more. It was published in the Harvard Theological Review in 2021, titled From Confrontation to Cooperation. Not enough time to go into all the details today, but I argued that there are philosophical reasons for why they differed, and based on some of their philosophical positions. But whatever the reasons were for the rift between Rabbi Greenberg and Rabbi Soloveitchik on this issue, there definitely was a rift. But at the same time, what I argue in the book is that Rabbi Greenberg's break from Rabbi Soloveitchik on interfaith dialogue really grew more out of his continuity with his teacher rather than his disagreements. There were specific things that Soloveitchik taught Yitz Greenberg that, in my view, influenced Yitz Greenberg to take the position that he did on Jewish-Christian dialogue. So ultimately, in my belief, it's more of a story of continuity between the disciples rather than departures and breaks. And I argue the same in terms of Rabbi David Hartman and Soloveitchik, another prominent Jewish theologian, another thinker who was a disciple of Rabbi Soloveitchik's, and actually the only student of his that I cover in the book who actually got smicha from Rabbi Soloveitchik, who's actually ordained by Soloveitchik. So you might say he was even closer of a disciple on that level, or the student-teacher relationship in rabbinics was much closer. Rabbi Soloveitchik, I discuss in the book, I tell the story, was the one who told David Hartman to go study philosophy. But the curious thing was that Rabbi Soloveitchik didn't say to David Hartman, just study philosophy anywhere. he saw that his student, David Hartman, was very interested in philosophy, not just traditional Talmud, and he needed an outlet to be able to fulfill his intellectual interests. And the school that Rabbi Soloveitchik recommended suggested to David Hartman to go study philosophy at was Fordham University, which is a Christian school. So the fact that of all places that he could have suggested, Rabbi Soloveitchik recommended Fordham to David Hartman was a strong indication that David Hartman wasn't totally breaking with Rabbi Soloveitchik on the topic of Jewish-Christian dialogue, just as Rabbi Greenberg did not feel he was breaking from him either, because in Rabbi Greenberg's view, he had a whole long back and forth with Rabbi Soloveitchik. I write up for you some of the messages that they exchanged in the book, some on the record, some off the record, some he only later revealed to me in more recent years. But in Rabbi Greenberg's view, Rabbi Soloveitchik essentially admitted to him in private that, I really don't have a problem with at least certain people like you, my student, who I know is capable of this, who I know is able to have a theological dialogue with Christians without compromising his own faith and theology. I have no problem with that. It's more for other reasons that I came out with this prohibition against interfaith dialogue. And he admitted, according to Rabbi Greenberg, Rabbi Soloveitchik admitted, as David Novak argued, that there are no halachic impediments to Jewish-Christian dialogue. So there are other reasons why both Rabbi Greenberg and Rabbi Hartman felt that Rabbi Soloveitchik was not as anti-Jewish Christian dialogue as others have made him out to be, or as his essay Confrontation makes him out to seem. And one of those reasons is a reason that I point to as well in the book is Rabbi Soloveitchik's own significant engagement with Christian thinkers themselves and his own writing. For those of you who are familiar with some of Soloveitchik's main essays in Jewish thought, his most prominent works, such as Halachic Man, Lonely Man of Faith, they engage throughout with Christian thinkers such as John Barth, Paul Tillich, and especially Protestant thinkers. And we shouldn't forget the original location where Rabbi Soloveitchik delivered Lonely Man of Faith. Now you can get it as a book. It's really a book-length essay. Arguably, Rabbi Soloveitchik's most known work in the non-Jewish world, Lonely Man of Faith, was originally delivered as an address to a Christian audience at a Christian theological seminary in Brighton, Massachusetts, right around here. So when you add all these things together, it does seem, even to add one more, scholars have observed that this word that Rabbi Soloveitchik used to characterize the differences between Judaism and Christianity, this word incommensurate, that word itself is from terminology borrowed from the Christian thinker John Barth. So there are a lot of ironies and maybe even some paradoxes here, but when you add all these things together, what seems to emerge, at least to Rabbi Greenberg and to me, is that Rabbi Soloveitchik was not as opposed to Jewish-Christian dialogue, even Jewish-Christian theological dialogue, as some have made him out to be. And to add one more example of a student or child of Soloveitchik's who really took Jewish-Christian theological dialogue to a place where maybe Rabbi Soloveitchik was not ready for it to go in his time, but one of his disciples was ready for that level of engagement was Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Lord Rabbi Sacks, the third disciple of Rabbi Soloveitchik that I discuss in the book. Rabbi Sacks was the one disciple who was not an official student of Rabbi Soloveitchik's. He wasn't ordained by him as Rabbi Hartman was. He didn't study with him in a more formal sense as Rabbi Greenberg did, but in my view, he really is a disciple of Rabbi Soloveitchik's for many reasons, as I argue in the book. His engagement with Christianity and interfaith dialogue was very profound, and was a core element of his rabbinate and his chief rabbinate as well. He was a frequent participant in interfaith conferences. He even, or some people may know who followed him closely, who read him closely, he was very close with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And more so, this may have been radical even for people in the time a few decades ago, but Rabbi Sacks even participated in interfaith prayer sessions with Christians. So he really took Jewish-Christian dialogue to the next stage. And there's one instance in particular that I want to highlight from Rabbi Sacks's Jewish-Christian theological work that I think is really moving and really speaks to where I think we could be headed, I hope, in interfaith engagement. And that was his response to a message he received from a Christian who said that she had been struggling in her faith, and she started reading him. She started reading Rabbi Sacks's works, and that brought her back closer to her own faith. And Rabbi Sacks wrote back to her that, I'm really glad that I was able to do this, that I was able to bring you back closer to his word in Rabbi Sacks's language, and Rabbi Sacks's words. It's a really remarkable example because if you consider the whole history of Jewish-Christian relations, not just this recent period that I've been discussing, the period of Orthodox Jewish-Christian relations, but back even before Vatican II in the 60s, back before World War II, back in the 2,000 years of shared history that we have together, for a rabbinic leader to come out publicly and say that he was happy to have helped a Christian come back to his or her faith is remarkable when you consider that whole history and some of the theological animus that had existed between Jews and Christians for those 1,800 or so years. And another element that's remarkable of the specific words that Rabbi Sacks used was the term his word. I'm happy that I was able to bring you back closer to his word, his with a capital H, meaning God. And that to me implied that Rabbi Sacks believed that Christianity could be considered just as much the word of God as Judaism is. And I think this position is borne out in Rabbi Sacks's writings, in Dignity of Difference, where he argues for multiple covenants and religious pluralism, even though he issued a retraction of that a few years later in a new edition. That retraction was kind of coerced in some way. It was politically coerced. It was done under pressure. But his original belief and sincere belief, in my mind, is stated in dignity of difference. So that's another raya, as you will, to use a Talmudic term. That's another proof that Rabbi Sachs considered Jewish-Christian dialogue important, because not just because it increases harmony and peace and understanding between our respective faiths, but because it can actually help members of our respective faiths become closer to their own teachings and their own faiths. So these are some examples of how Soloveitchik's disciples dealt with Christianity and interfaith dialogue. And their main efforts were, for good reasons, focused on Judaism's relations with Christianity. And we're continuing this in this era of our history, and it's extremely vital to do so. But where I feel that we can go now, where I believe we need to go now, is we need to build on this incredible work and unbelievable progress that we've made in Jewish-Christian relations, in interfaith theological understanding between one another. We need to build on this and expand this to other faiths and other religions. And work is being done in this front. There are various groups that have efforts in Jewish, Christian, Islamic relations, and in different combinations of faiths. The interfaith conferences that Rabbi Sachs, for example, participated in the World Conference of Religions. But I believe that this needs to be a core element of our work in interfaith relations going forward. I think it's we can maybe view it as learning a language, where if you've taken the time and investment and effort to learn a new language, learn a foreign language, let's say you've learned Italian and now you want to learn Portuguese. So you don't want to lose the Italian that you've learned, so you need to continue practicing it and keeping it up, because you learned it for a reason. There was a strong reason that you learned it, but you just need to add some time in your schedule to somehow incorporate your learning of Portuguese. So my belief is this is what we could be, or maybe should be, doing in Jewish-Christian relations. We need to continue the efforts that my teacher, Rabbi Greenberg, Shalita, may he continue to live long, that we need to continue to build on those efforts that they made, and Rabbi Hartman and Rabbi Sachs, and also now expand this conversation that we're having in these relations to members of all faiths.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Daniel, for that. Would you like to join me here? Sure. So as we get settled, I believe our Associate Director, Camille Markey, will be circulating with a microphone. So are there any initial takers for questions from the floor? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Two questions. One about Hinduism, and about do you think that this work actually can kind of move past monotheism or certain forms of monotheism into kind of connections between Jews and Hindus, and the work that Brill has done on that. And the other thing is to just highlight Rabbi Sachs's unwillingness to sit with in intrafaith settings. He did not go to Limud, which was a pluralist Jewish gathering of learning. In other words, he would much rather sit with the Archbishop of Canterbury rather than a Reform rabbi. So the complexity of that pluralism for for Sachs as well.
Thank you for the question. All right.
Just move
I think-
it a little higher. There you go.
All right. I can just take it like this. It's on, right?
Yes,
Okay.
it's on.
Yeah, thank you for the questions, and both very good questions. To address the first one first, I think that there is a lot that Judaism can learn from Hinduism and vice versa. And to that end, there have been scholars working in that field, Jewish-Hindu relations, Jewish-Hindu dialogue. Alon Goshen Gottstein comes to mind there. We're doing that as well. We're doing some of that in the book project that I'm currently working on. I have a book that I'm working on now with two colleagues in religious studies. And that book is designed to bring Judaism into conversation with Hinduism, but also Hinduism into conversation with other faiths, and Judaism into conversation with other faiths as well. We hope to have this volume out by next year or so. There are certainly affinities in some ways between Judaism and Hinduism, or whether Hinduism is monotheism or not, that gets more complicated, whether they acknowledge there to be one supreme being, overriding being, that's the, and different manifestations you can add in. Yeah. Is this better? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that, yeah, I thought that mic didn't seem so hot, so to speak. Yeah, and the second question, or second point on Rabbi Sachs, Olav Shalom, and intra-faith pluralism, it's been pointed out, and I pointed out in the book as well, that his pluralism does seem to come into view much more so in interfaith, with his willingness to attend conferences with Christian and other religious leaders, and intra-faith did not seem to be there in the same way. There are various reasons for that, hypotheses. It's still a mystery. I know it's a topic of lingering disappointment for some people, and yet for others, depends where they are on the religious political spectrum. Some people still feel that was a right decision for various reasons, but it does make his pluralism a bit more complex.
Thank you so much. Another question from the floor. Yep. One that side, one that side.
Do you have any thoughts of what Rabbi Soloveitchik's real underlying fears were? Did he ever voice any feeling that the Christian side of such conversations would somehow have something untoward result from their participation? Because it sounds to me like he was carrying forward a tradition of his family, which in Europe was opposed to, for a while, opposed to participation in the Enlightenment, and wanted to avoid general education to the Jewish population.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And his family was certainly opposed to a lot of things, and religious Zionism included that he broke from high-level women's Judaic education, that he had to break from as well, and or he felt he should. It's with Rabbi Soloveitchik, it can be hard to know the reasons for some of his non-halachic positions. The halachic positions are much easier. Okay, it's clearly prohibited by Jewish law, so it's prohibited here. But if it's not clearly prohibited under halakha, he wasn't someone that was so revealing all the time with his inner reasons for his positions, and so different people have proffered different answers. And when it comes to Jewish-Christian dialogue, it's also hard to know. But family reasons may be a big reason. It was difficult for him to take the position that he took on support of the state of Israel, for example, and the rifts that caused with his family, and maybe he didn't want to widen the rift. Another reason may be to protect and preserve his political standing within the Orthodox community. Rabbi Greenberg, Yitz Greenberg often likes to observe that Rabbi Soloveitchik was a gadol, meaning he was a great Torah scholar of his era, one of the great rabbinic leaders of his era, but he was a smart gadol in Rabbi Greenberg's eyes, meaning a Torah leader who had a political savvy for him. He was someone who knew where his community was and how far they could go and how far they couldn't go. And maybe he felt that this was something that his community was not ready for at the time. And if he came out and said that they should go and delve deeply into this field, then that may have alienated some within his community from him. And so he always tried to keep a good read and have a good feel for where his constituents were. So that could have been part of the reason too.
Thank you. So Matt?
Thanks for this. I really enjoyed the talk. I love the book. I wanted to give you an opportunity to reflect on your dual role as a rabbi and a scholar. I'm interested to the extent to which you're looking at these people from an academic perspective, but also you have your own commitments, I imagine, theologically about this question of Jewish-Christian relations. I'm just interested how you balance that, how you sort of play those two roles at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you for the question and for your words about the book and the talk. It's something I think about a lot and I write about as well. I lead off the book with that topic. Even before the introduction, I mentioned that this whole project that I'm engaging with here in writing about Rabbi Soloveitchik's children is both a scholarly and a theological task for me that I approach as a scholar as well as a rabbi theologian. It's in some respects, I do that because that's how I've been taught from Rabbi Yitz Greenberg and his Rebbe. You know, they were all, this is a line of scholar theologians, and we have to balance that. How I balance it is by picking projects where I'm able to write both as a scholar and as a theologian, and often they can come together. And also, I'm able to teach, I'm privileged to teach now in a setting where at St. John's University, I can be both a rabbi and a professor, or I can have students who call me professor or doctor and students who call me rabbi, and I really like that. It's about a 50-50 split among my students, and I don't think it would be that way at most other secular colleges, and maybe it would work that way here at Boston College as well. So that's part of it, And was there another aspect to your question?
I suppose the way in which your own ideas about Jewish-Christian dialogue, bounce off of the history that you're studying.
Right. So I have strong ideas, strong convictions in this area myself that definitely feed into my work in this area. I do believe in a lot of what my teachers, Rabbi Greenberg and Rabbi Sachs, have written about the Jewish-Christian relationship, and ideas like multiple covenants, multiple truths, ideas that are still controversial in the, let's say, mainstream Orthodox world, even centrist Orthodoxy, and even some wings in modern Orthodoxy that's still a bit controversial. But these are things that I do believe, and it's why I am working in the realm of interfaith dialogue and interreligious relations today, because I do believe, well, it's going to go on record at some point, so I might as well go on record here, that there are multiple paths to God, that just like a parent can have different children, multiple children, and love each one in their own unique way and have their own unique relationship with their child. The relationship that a parent will have with one child will be completely different from the relationship that they'll have with another child, and yet they can still love those two children exactly the same. I don't see, in my own theological thinking, not just my own impulses, but based on my study of Jewish sources, I think this is borne out in Jewish sources as well, that I don't see why God as a parent cannot operate the same way.
I think you're having a Pope Francis moment. You've been following the news recently. I want to follow up on that, actually, as a fellow scholar theologian as well, one who has ordination. Just curious about, a lot of what I'm hearing is sort of kind of an internal working out from within Orthodox theology about how other religions can be considered. Do you ever see spaces, moments, areas in which data from those other religions can be incorporated within halakhic reasoning, or within, say, maybe not halakhic reasoning, maybe that's too far, but within Jewish theological framings, constructions, etc.?
Meaning, if another religion has an approach that I find valuable on a perspective.
Or even the product of the dialogue with Christianity, that something is productive out of the dialogue with Christianity that then itself begins to shape ways in which Jewish theology frames or offers propositions or anything like that. There's sort of a parallel debate happening in Christianity. Can you take in data from other traditions and use it to actually construct Christian theological claims? And for some, that's controversial. You can't. And for others, that's permissible. Do you ever see that debate playing out in Orthodox contexts?
I haven't seen it too much, but if I understand you correctly, I think that Rabbi Greenberg has done some of this in his work. If you read his book on Jewish-Christian relations between heaven and earth, where he recounts his whole history in the field of Jewish-Christian relations, as well as the development of his thinking in the area, I think you'll see that a lot of his thinking was informed by the dialogue that he had with Christian thinkers and his own studies of Christianity. I think he does do this in his work. I don't observe it as much in the works of Rabbi Hartman and Rabbi Sachs, for example, but I do think it's present in Rabbi Greenberg's work.
Thank you. Other questions from the floor? Ruth Langer.
after this last question, I'm going in 6 different directions, which is creating a challenge. But I wanted to pick up on Rabbi Soloveitchik's initial prohibition. There are those who would say that, and you sort of hinted around this a little bit, that embedded in his actual article in Confrontation was this permission to an elite group to participate in dialogue. And so, and that's something that was sort of more squashed in the publication, which was accompanied by a sort of summary and a sort of a halachicizing of what he'd written in that essay. So what we end up with is a sort of debate between, maybe I'll try to frame this as a question rather than a statement. Do we have any sense of what the Rav was thinking when he embedded that statement in the essay itself? Or are people doing a sort of a Talmudic exegesis on the essay to come up with the permission to engage in dialogue?
It's a great question, and I think it may be about 70-30, 80-20 on most of the weight going to the post-hoc Talmudic exegesis, and then about 20% of some things you can read in there that were actually embedded. Rabbi Greenberg sometimes is referred to that statement, sometimes referred to Confrontation as Marano writing for those reasons. Like, on the surface, presenting it as one way, but on a deeper level, presenting something else. You can make parallels between what some scholars have argued about Maimonides, Rabbi Soloveitchik's model, the Rambam, Moses Maimonides, and his philosophical writings. How much of that was meant to be explicit, and how much of that was meant to only be understood by a select elite. It's part of the difficulty with interpreting and parsing Soloveitchik, but I think the split is about that 70-30, 80-20 between those. But that Rabbi Greenberg does argue in and has argued in his later books, and as well in some email messages to me and in interviews with me that I had with him for the purposes of the book, where he argued that Rabbi Soloveitchik really did intend the prohibition only for majority of people, and he did allow some people, like Rabbi Greenberg himself, to engage in this dialogue. And so the question is why? That's where the trouble comes in. That's where the Talmudic parsing needs our Talmudic skills need to enter the picture.
Thank you. If I might pose another question, if I don't see a hand yet. What's at stake for modern Orthodoxy, if you will, and its various permutations and movements? I know it's much more diverse than it was in the 60s. So what's at stake if dialogue with other traditions is permitted?
A lot, to be short, to be brief, but to expand on that, first of all, peace and harmony among peoples, just to be able to live together, to understand one another, to not just be civil, but I think mutual acceptance and mutual love, I think is the next stage that is at stake, that I hope we arrive at. That's why the title of the book on interfaith relations that I'm working on with my colleagues Elaine Y. and Anthony Lee. The title of that is Beyond Dialogue, because we hope to move interfaith relations to the plane of just of not just dialogue and mutual understanding, but actual mutual love, so that we can really fulfill the dictum of the Bible to love your neighbor as yourself. Ve'afta l'reacha kamocha. That's one thing that's at stake, to be able to fulfill the words of the Bible themselves. Another major issue that's at stake is the quite serious issue that we're confronting now in the Middle East, which just continues to get more complicated and disturbing as we speak. Events going on there now, I'm sure, are on a lot of our minds, but to be able to not have war among different faiths, it seems like such a utopian, faraway ideal now. But if we don't at least set up the theological framework now among students and scholars of theology for how different religions can understand one another and live together, and for example, on a very theologically tinged issue, the Holy Land, a land that we, all three of our monotheistic faiths, all three of our Abrahamic faiths acknowledge to be holy. How do we understand that pretty big topic amongst one another? How do we possibly share it among one another? That's something pretty large at stake. So yeah, that's the a lot there when I let off the answer. That there's a lot at stake.
Good. Thank you. I think this will conclude our formal end of the program. We have books for sale at the back. We have refreshments. Please avail yourself. Daniel Goodman will be available to sign books and to talk with you and take your questions one-on-one as well. So please, again, join me in thanking him for his wonderful presentation tonight.